then they're saying basically like the voters are demanding like tax cuts and more spending, even though we're bankrupt. We're literally going bankrupt as a country. The interest, our average interest on our debt is more than what we're going to be spending on our military here in the next couple of years. And we're literally, these programs are going insolvent and bankrupt. And the politicians are talking about more spending, more tax cuts. Of course, we all know from significant amounts of research and data that the tax side of the equation is really neither here nor there. Studies, in fact, show that over the course of basically the last 80 years, 90 years or whatever, since we've had a federal income tax, I guess it would be 100 years at this point. But it didn't really matter what the tax rates were and what the deductions were and what the loopholes were. The federal government has essentially brought in about 18% of 18% of income of all the income. We talk about, I pay 10% tax rate if you're low income, and you pay a 40% tax rate on income over $1 million. Obviously, we have a graduated sort of progressive tax rate, federal income tax rate here in America. Nobody even really talks about this stuff anymore. Literally, nobody even talks about federal income tax rates and the which level. Remember when, like, under George W. Bush, the big dispute was whether the top federal income tax rate was like 39.8% or whether it was like 36%, something like that. I mean, people don't even talk about this stuff anymore. But basically, it doesn't matter what those rates are, what the levels are, what the income levels are. It's basically going to average at 18% over time. It's just how it's worked out. It's how the economy works, how people work. It's how what's basically the level of income that the economy can function on with still giving to the government. And there's this, obviously a pull and push between the private sector and the government when it comes to these things. And so the tax side of the equation, is not the issue. It's actually all of our debt, all of our deficit is exclusively due to the spending increases. And there's actually studies that look at that issue as well, and say like, okay, here's like sort of the trend of what the government's doing in terms of revenues and expenses over time. And you can see this trend of revenues and expenses. And you see basically the revenues kind of consistently doing really good. Revenues have been really solid. They've been about 18% of all income. In terms of a percentage of the economy, they've been pretty steady, if not growing. In terms of total real tax revenues, have been increasing every single year. The federal government's been bringing in more and more tax revenues every single year. All-time record revenues, actually. In fact, literally all-time high record of federal tax revenues right now this year. And yet we're also having all-time record deficits. And so what you see has nothing to do with taxes or revenue side of the equation. It's all on the spending side where you've seen it just to the moon. Federal spending, both sort of over time, slowly, with our entitlement programs and with discretionary spending and pork and stimulus packages and everything else. And these boondoggle Inflation Reduction Act, obviously Orwellianly named, but it's just insane. And then the voters, and then the Democrats are out there pushing basically misinformation on the federal debt, federal budget, taxes and revenues, acting as if raising taxes on the ultra rich, ultra wealthy is going to do anything at all. It would do nothing in terms of the federal budget. And it would hurt the economy at the same time. They're not honest. The Democrats are not honest with the American people that to truly fund what they're suggesting of a European style socialism, you have to have the poor people, the poor and the working classes paying massive in taxes and the middle class paying even higher. So you have the poor and the working class paying massive 50% plus of all income taxes to pay for the European socialism that the American Democrats are trying to put in place here in the United States. but they're not honest with the American people. The media's on their side. They lie about it. And so a lot of Americans actually think that the tax side of the equation actually matters. They actually think the tax side of the equation matters when you're talking about the federal debt, the federal budget. They don't realize that it has nothing to do with the tax rates or the tax policies or the deductions or the rates or the levels where your marginal income rates go up. None of that. None of that. No, it's all spending. And most people don't know that because the Democrats have been lying about it. So it's absolutely insane. And it goes back to one of my long-standing points, which is in the United States, when a country is given a constitution like we were given as a people because of our founding fathers, because of the Revolutionary War generation, and the people of this country were handed a wonderful, wonderful, stable, functioning, well-designed system of government. From that point forward, it's still on the people to maintain that and to make sure that it's complied with and followed, et cetera, because otherwise it's just a meaningless document with some words written on it, like the North Korean Constitution is. So it's really unfortunate. I blame all of this on just the general public, the voters, the general voting population. Because if the general voting population was as well as formed as I am and as you are, we would all be demanding of our politicians massive spending cuts at the federal level so that we don't bankrupt our country and put ourselves in a very, very dangerous position where if we are ever in a war or we are ever in a bad spot, we don't have a financial crisis and a currency collapse. Excuse me. But that's not happening. The voters out there are not like me and you, where the voters out there are not demanding massive spending cuts at the federal level. And so guess what? Our politicians are not promising that. And really that's what this entire article is about how this is insane. This is absolutely like there's this massive disconnect. There's a huge disconnect, a huge disconnect. Riddler on the roof, thank you for the follow, my man. Welcome. Good to see you. Good to have you. Chiba Hawk 420 is in the house. Good to see you in chat. Anyway, that's pretty much and I've always said that it's like you can, and what really annoys me is a lot of people are like, oh, I hate politicians. It's all the politicians' fault. Oh, I hate the party system and with the two-party system and the Republican Party and the Democrat. It's all their fault. It's all their fault. Or it's like, oh, I hate the special interest groups. Or, I hate, oh my gosh, the billionaires and the billionaires. It's like, and it's this problem and it's this group and it's that cause of problems and our government's this and it's that. It's so horrible. Oh, it's all these people's fault. So, we got to hate on these people. It's like, dude, everybody's going after the wrong people. The people that are responsible for the situation in America right now are the voters, the general public. We have people in America who are proud to say that they don't follow politics and they don't follow what our government's doing. We have a culture in this country where people proudly brag about the fact that they don't follow current events. They don't follow news. I would say there's a 60-70% majority of Americans who would proudly brag to you about the fact that they're totally uninformed and ignorant on what's going on with the federal budget, what's going on with the federal deficit and the debt, what's going on with politics in our country. And yet then like the 20% or 30% of us who actually are following this stuff and know what's going on, we're all left to like try to lay blame on, the other, let's say there's 30% of us following this stuff, 15% Democrat, 15% Republican. And the 15% of the people in this country that are Republicans that follow politics closely are then going to blame it all on the, 15% of Americans that are following politics closely and are Democrats. Instead of both of them, everybody come together and say, no, the real problem here is with the 70% of voters who don't know anything about what's going on in our country. We've got 70% plus of American voters who are, here we are at the height literally the height of an American presidential campaign, one of the most insane presidential campaigns of all time, and most people are just totally out to lunch. I mean, it's pretty bad. And nobody's spending their free time studying history like I am. Nobody's spending their free time reading books on history, listening to audiobooks on history, reading sort of like in-depth reports from, I don't know, places like the Wall Street Journal, Foreign Affairs, just to name two that I like to read. But it's like, no, people are spending their time on social media and dumb, like, 20-second videos online. Oh man. Anyway, there's my rant, guys. Sorry, I was trying to. I'm gonna turn that one into a YouTube video. Maybe it was like, I don't know. Was that like 10 minutes? That was like a 10-minute rant.